Hi folks, and welcome back to the channel, and in this video I'm going to go over the more technical terms of how I've installed two B2Bs or DC to DC chargers, or technically they're called VICTRON ORION DC to DC chargers in my van. So after my first install video of my VICTRON DC to DC ORION charger, which there'll be a link up there or down in the video description to that video to show you how I've installed it, I recently put a second one in. Now originally my VICTRON ORION was in addition to the built-in DC to DC charger that the van had, which is an electro block one, which basically is probably just a very over-engineered relay. So it wasn't great, and after a while I realized that it really wasn't adding anything to the van at all. So I've disabled all the onboard chargers of the van. But it did mean then I was only getting 30 amps charge when I was driving, and with winter and everything else that happens in a van, and when you want to stay somewhere for longer, it did mean that when I wanted to run the engine for a charge or of a short drive, I wasn't getting that much charge back into my lithium batteries. And having upgraded to 3 lithium batteries now and over 300 amp hours of power, I wanted more of a larger charge current going into those batteries, so I didn't have to either run my engine for longer or drive for longer to recharge them. So I thought, you know what, 2 VICTRON ORION DC to DC chargers would be just the ticket for that. So how did I install them is the biggest question I've got now. Quite simply really, if you go back to my first video, I installed that using just standard 16mm cable. As the area in the front of my van is pretty much all set up for electrics, the distance from the starter battery to the Orion was around about 1 meter. So what I've done with my 2 Orions is move them from my battery box to underneath my driver's seat and place them on top of the biggest heatsink I've got in my van, which is my 3 kilowatt inverter. So both Orions sit on top of that heatsink, which allows them to cool, and all I've done is taken the 2 feeds in. Now bear in mind my chargers are isolated chargers, so they don't share a common chassis negative or a chassis earth, depending on how you see it. So what I've got is a 16mm positive cable and a 16mm negative cable coming from my starter battery, and they went all the way into my battery box and fed into the Orion, and then back out from the Orion to my bus bar. So essentially all I've done is I have removed the Orion from my battery box, placed the old existing Orion with the new Orion underneath the driver's seat, and then just basically split that 16mm cable that went from the starter battery to my battery box, and I've split that at the point where I can then tee off into the 2 Orions. So there's a T or a Y piece, if you look at that connection coming off the main negative, and all I've used for that is a battery terminal connector. So I've put some loops on the end, some lugs, and what I've done to isolate that is I've used a few layers of heat shrink to make sure that obviously nothing comes in contact with any of the metal parts that were exposed of that connection. And from those 2 negative connections go to obviously the starter battery, the inside of the Orion connections. And then pretty much the same thing again on the negative side. However, this time I've not used a battery terminal connection, I have used a mega fuse. Now bear in mind the cable I've used, 16mm cable, is good for around about 110 amps at this short distance that I'm using. Bear in mind where I've chopped into it is around about 1/2 meter length from the starter battery, so not that great a distance at all. So I've used a mega fuse, and the mega fuse is rated at 100 amps. Fair enough, I'm only going to take over 60 amps, maybe with the loss and things like that in DC to DC charging, maybe at most it'll be sort of 65 to 70 amps. So the 100 amp mega fuse that I'm placing in there is really a protection of if anything happens to the cable en route that shorts out somewhere, that fuse will blow. So I've come off the other side of the mega fuse and I've then gone out to the two connections of the inbound, the starter battery connections on the Orions. So now my Orions are powered, and then I can go through the setup process that I went through in the main video with the new Orion, which is basically to connect via Bluetooth, to tell it it's a charger, set up the battery profiles, change the pin, all that kind of stuff. And then once you're done, then you plug in the little connector. I'm going to set mine just as I did the original, which is I'm going to set it to auto detect when the engine is running and when it's stopped, because it's been working flawlessly. So I'm just going to leave it that way. A little top tip as well I found: if you change it to tell it it's a smart alternator, it actually delivers a little bit more power, about 1.5 amps. 2.5 amps is 3 amps, and I shall take an extra 3 amps any day on my charging system. Right, so that's both of them then set up, and all we're doing now is kind of continuing our journey back into the battery box. So like I say, the two 16mm cables that were going to the battery box that went to the Orion, well, I've now diverted them straight onto my bus bar. So I've got a 16mm cable going to the negative side of my bus bar, which feeds in through my BMV, so I can manage all my electric usage and stuff like that. And then the other 16mm cable, the positive, goes to my positive bus bar, which feeds out to everything that's powered and charges and the batteries and everything like that. And that's pretty much it, really. All I now have to do is turn on the ignition, wait a few seconds while all the systems come to power up and everything like that with the engine. The engine settles down, the alternator kicks in, starts producing its charge voltage. The charge voltage is detected by both Orions. Boom, both Orions activate and start bulk charging my 3 lithium batteries. So the way I look at this, I had one 30 amp B2B Orion. I had 200 amp hour batteries. So each battery was getting 15 amps. I now have two 30 amp Orions giving 60 amps charge. I have 300 amp hour batteries. So now each battery gets 20 amp charge. So everyone's winning. So it's quite common as well, if I'm driving down the road with both my B2Bs working and a good old bit of sun in the sky or whatever, that I'll get over 100 amps of charge. The batteries really don't get that much use in a day, maybe 50 amp hours, maybe 55 amp hours is the typical usage. Now bear in mind, we don't use gas in the van at all. Literally everything is electric. I can get electric hot water, I can cook on electric, got a microwave, got hot plates, I've got induction, got a toaster, I've got a kettle, they're all electric. We've got a 12 volt compressor fridge as well. So everything's electric. I edit on electric. I watch TV on electric, strangely enough, don't use gas for that. So yeah, a lot of electric is used, but the idea of the 3 batteries and the 2 B2Bs is that in the times where you don't get that much solar, or in the times where you want to spend more time on the epic park ups you've found, and you want to extend that time maybe into a week of sat on a park up, then the more battery capacity and the 2 B2Bs really come into themselves of giving you that opportunity to sit on a park up or have an engine running for a short period of time if you need it for that much longer. This is the PDF that I've created for you that shows everything that I've got installed, how it's installed, and all the little bits in between. Obviously you can download this PDF, it's going to be in the video description, where you can look at it in more detail. There's information on the cable sizes, the connectors that I've used, and all the other devices and products and everything like that will all be in the video description down below. So I hope that will help, but I thought by producing a nice PDF drawing for you, you can download, you can scrutinize at your wish, and hopefully that'll help far more than I could explain in this video. So I hope that's helped. There were a lot of questions about how I'd wired it, and obviously a lot of other people have wired it differently as well. And I like to keep things very simple and very uncomplicated. It's been roughly 4 months now since I installed them, so I thought it was fair to make this video to give you my experience over the last 4 months as well, which is they have worked flawlessly, absolutely flawlessly. I can't really elaborate more than that. So if you want a very simple way to install 2 B2Bs in your van to get the maximum charge current into your batteries, bear in mind I have batteries that accept 100 amp charge as well as can discharge at 100 amps, so make sure your batteries are capable of accepting this higher charge rate. I suppose that is one little caveat to this video, but yeah, so my batteries are perfectly okay with that. Like I say, even if I have everything on, so 2 B2Bs, 1 mains charger and some solar, between the 3 batteries, that is still far less than their maximum capacity of 100 amps inbound charge. Obviously you may have further questions, of which you can leave them in the comments section down below, and I'll do my very best to answer them. But otherwise there is a link in the video description to the B2Bs that I have, and obviously the little lugs and everything that I've connected it all with. So if you should wish to install this yourself, please go ahead and do so, because, well, why not? It's more power. Right, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys, bye.